World Cup mood board here on 99.94. Yeah, let's get this party started. I mean, as far as moods go, I don't think we can get much more moody or down than we can about South African cricket right at the moment. Um, that is, yeah, it's another one. I mean, South Africa's Quinton de Kock is standing in the rain at one stage, waiting for someone to calculate DLS. Another point, Temba Bavuma also standing in the rain, was looking on as Richard Inangava slipped over just after he delivered the last ball of one of his overs. Then they had to both watch him be taken from the field. Later on, they'd have to wait for a free hit that took a little bit too long because it was the last ball of the over and people had started to move on. Then they had just Zimbabwe time wasting, just the very basics of Zimbabwe trying to pick up the ball. Sometimes it wasn't even Zimbabwe time wasting. They were literally trying to use a wet towel to dry the ball. I'm not sure how that really works in any particular way either. Then there was the DRS call, of course, which was a good decision. In fact, it was a good decision for Zimbabwe to do it. Time wasting, but also at one stage, Quinton de Kock thought he was out and started leaving the field, which it turned out he wasn't out, and so he had to come back on. It just felt like everything was there to make sure that South Africa did not win that game. And South Africa played brilliantly, right? They did everything they could to actually get the points. They bowled through the rain. They easily could have had problems with it. It wasn't probably quite as wet when they were bowling as well as when Zimbabwe was bowling, if we're being fair. De Kock just went absolutely bananas, trying to take the total down inside of 5 overs, even when it was like a 9-over chase at one point. And they had dominated Zimbabwe when they bowled as well, right up until that point when the ball essentially became soaked, which is probably when you should, not be playing anyway. Even the umpires, I mean, there's two ways of looking at this. Either the umpire should never have kept them out on the ground at all because it was bad conditions, and the game should have been called off a long way before. Certainly, those were not conditions that any World Cup cricket game should ever be played in, let's be honest. But they did actually try and get them on, right? And they realized that in that particular situation, South Africa was so far in front, it would be unfair for them not to get the result. But at a certain point, what are we doing here? It's not a water sport, right? Don't Google water sports if you're a kid either. Also, Australian pitches are some of the worst in the world to actually play on when it's raining because you've got a really hard surface and then it gets slippery on the top. We obviously saw a couple of Zimbabwean players fall over. Depending on how you feel in this situation, you either thought it was blatant time wasting or it was slippery. There was a point when one of the Zimbabwean fielders was chasing the ball out to the boundary. There was no time wasting there. He was taking the world's smallest steps. Either both of his hamstrings had gone or he was terrified of falling over as he was chasing the ball out to the boundary. So I felt like, to me, the ICC and the umpires did everything they could to actually get this game to go ahead. But it probably should have been called a long way before. And the ICC should know, when it comes to South Africa and rain, the rain is always going to win. Should we do a quick history lesson? We'll do a quick history lesson. In 1992, South Africa were chasing an improbable 22 runs from the final 13 deliveries when it started raining. I say improbable for that era. Obviously, these days you'd be like, well, that's easy. But back then, that was quite the chase. There was a little bit of rain. They leave the field. When they came back on, the total was now needed. The scoreboard now lit up with 22 runs needed from one ball. So they needed... they had 13 balls and then they had one ball. That actually was what ended up changing the rain rules forever. Before that, we didn't have the Duckworth-Lewis system. It was just a system that Richie Benaud came up with when he was bored one Tuesday afternoon. And also, it was pure cricket that South Africa still had to go out there and face that one ball. In 2015, South Africa had 2 rain-affected matches. The first one against Pakistan maybe had a little consequence because they still qualified for the next round, but they did lose it. And then in the semi-final with New Zealand, with clouds around and the potential for rain, South Africa decided to bat first, which, a little bit like Craig Irvine today, is very rarely a good idea in rain-reduced games. That said, South Africa did go on to make a fairly decent score in that game. and they still lost when South African-born Grant Elliott beat them at the end. And then there's 2003, which is, I think, the other two, you could say rain was involved, but it's really 2003 when we talk about South Africa and rain. That's the granddaddy of them all. Mark Boucher hits a piece of soap into the stands from Murali. Beautiful strike of the ball. The scores have tied on DLS, and all South Africa have to do is score a single off the last ball of the over. And he turns this ball into the leg side and doesn't really look for a run at all. South Africa had misunderstood the DLS. They just thought that you needed to be at the par total, not above the par total. Good on them for pretty much educating everyone in world cricket from that moment forward. And they blocked their way to a tie and were dumped from a home tournament before the final round had been played. I mean, when it comes to South Africa, there's obviously been many World Cup heartbreaks in dry weather as well. I mean, that tie I just mentioned, not even the only tie that's ever kicked them out of a World Cup. But it does seem that when it rains in the World Cup, it rains heaviest of all in the South African hearts. This washout basically took a guaranteed point away from them. Who knows what Zimbabwe would have done in a real game, but in the game that we were watching, there was absolutely no doubt that South Africa had all but won this game until it got completely drowned. If Pakistan has a good tournament from here, South Africa need to be brilliant to make the semi-finals. And also, just to go back to the last World Cup, I thought some things went their way in the last World Cup, but regardless of that, they won 4 games out of 5 and didn't make the finals. That sort of thing scars you. And now when you lose a point that you are desperate to get, it's not ideal. So sad to say that not the greatest day in South African cricket, though, as I said, they've had a few. Bangladesh, certainly a lot better for them. They've never won in the second part of the T20 tournament before. So this was a huge deal no matter what to them. And last year I went into great detail about how they don't make any runs. And I could easily say the same about today. They didn't make enough runs. A couple of things helped them. Tuscan Ahmed obviously took some wickets and basically made it a 50-50 game after a couple of balls. And then the Dutch decided to run themselves out. But you could tell that Bangladesh didn't make enough runs because the Dutch still managed to almost certainly get a lot closer to this total than they should have with essentially Colin Ackerman and tail-end detritus. So it was certainly a closer game than it should have been. And that's because, again, Bangladesh didn't make any runs. However, at a certain point, you have to celebrate the fact that they actually won the game. And also, if Bangladesh has any format of cricket that they're not particularly good at, it's T20. And I base that on the fact that in the last 3 years, of all the teams that are still left in this World Cup, they have the lowest win-loss ratio in T20 cricket. So I'm basing it on all the losing that they have done. They actually were starting, I thought, building towards something quite good with their local league. And then the cricket board took it over and completely ruined the BPL kind of forever, from what I can tell. But look, they got a game here. They were over the moon. It was a messy win against Netherlands. And Netherlands who couldn't even stop running themselves out. But there are certainly times for analysis. And I think in this particular case, it was quite clear that Shakib Al Hassan was just over the moon at this particular win, and that it meant something for those players who were out there. And remember, he's old enough to have played in all the T20 World Cups so far. In fact, he's old enough to remember that when we first started the T20 World Cups, we didn't call them T20 World Cups, we called them World T20s. I want to talk about Tuscan Ahmed. There is no doubt that Tuscan Ahmed is a frustrating player. He started his T20 career back in 2013. So, we're a decade into his professional life at this point. And he averages mid-50s with the ball in Test cricket as well. So, we know that there's talent there, but we also are more than aware that it hasn't always worked for him. One thing I would say is that he has, what he did tonight is something that he completely has within his game. It's quite clear that his record doesn't, I think, accurately show the talent that he has. As a T20 bowler so far, if you go through his numbers, he's really been best as that sort of enforcer role bowler in the middle overs. And he should be a lot better than that. He really should be a power play bowler at the very least as well. And you can see here that he's had a few years where he's averaged under 30. with the ball in the power play, and quite a few years where he's been around that mark. I think if you're around 30 and below, you're probably a fairly good power play bowler. This year so far, even with those 2 wickets today, he hasn't done as well. But that's essentially, I think, what would be really handy for Bangladesh. If he can be a constant threat in the power play, and then you have Mustafiza at the end being all fizzy and everything, I think that's a really good, begin, middle, and end between the three. Fizz can bowl a couple of overs up front. Tuscan can bowl in the middle. There's a lot of flexibility in that, but he really has to be as good as he was today in the power play. Well, not as good as he was today. Took 2 wickets in the first 2 balls. I mean, he should try and be that good every day. Onto the Dutch bowling. It's worth talking about this because I thought they did bowl very well. They should be gutted for this game, the Dutch, because I thought they had a legitimate chance of winning this game. I thought this was a decent matchup for them. They probably got conditions that were going to favour them a little bit more as well. We knew that Bangladesh is a team that probably couldn't strike them out of the game, or shouldn't strike them out of the game. And at the start, Netherlands won the toss and they bowled first. And that looked like a big mistake because they started bowling horrendously, if we're being honest. And Bangladesh got right away from them. And then suddenly, in 2 consecutive overs, they struck with the first ball, Paul van Meekeren and then Pringle. And from 40 for 3 after 5, Netherlands went on to dominate them. After 14 overs, they had Bangladesh 94 for 5, right? They were completely on top at this point. Tuscan Ahmed took his first wicket in a World Cup, which was Shakib Al Hassan. I'll be telling people that for a long time, won't he? Unfortunately, towards the end, it's worth saying Logan van Beek bowled quite well today. He hasn't been as much of a factor this World Cup as he has been for Netherlands over the last little while. But unfortunately for the Netherlands, Bangladesh got away a little bit at the end. But even so, 144, Netherlands should have been looking at that at halftime and thinking, we can chase that. But if we have to say something good about the Dutch bowling, and there's the Dutch batting, 2 balls into their innings, and they'd lost their 2 batters. It was not particularly ideal, is the best way of putting it. Is this the Dutch batting video? There we go. Sorry, everyone. Vikramjit Singh and Baz Delita both out to Tuscan Ahmed, as we talked about before. That happens, and they certainly could have worked their way back from that. I think the bigger problem was that after that, they went on a run-out spree. Can you call 2 run-outs in 3 balls a spree? I think you can. It's not ideal, is it? Max O'Dowd running himself out, calling a second that probably was never there. Although it seems to be that's the only way anyone can get Max O'Dowd out at the moment, for being honest. And then Tom Cooper repeating that trick, going for a 3. This is the World Cup of 3s. We're going to have to, there's a 20-minute video essay that only I would watch. But yeah, 2 balls later, Tom Cooper was out without facing a ball. Your diamond duck, too talented a player for the Netherlands to not get a ball out of him at all. And the Netherlands were 15 for 4 at that stage. And the fact that they got into the game, that Van Meekeren was slogging at the end and they weren't that far away, does tell you that they fought on really well. But they were just so far behind. And, the actual final result is flattered a little bit by the fact that Bangladesh didn't make a big total, and that when Van Meekeren got a couple of balls away, it got them a little bit closer than they should have, and should be warning signs for Bangladesh. But again, Netherlands getting that close just got to frustrate them, because they had a horrendous game. They were bad at the start with the ball, they were bad at the end with the ball, they were bad at the start and in the middle with the bat, and they ended up only 10 or so runs short. That is giving up a win in an important part of the World Cup after what happened in the last World Cup, where they were absolutely terrible. They really needed that win. So hopefully they can find it later on in the tournament. And it's just worth talking about Hobart, finish up there. Australia obviously likes to tell the world about the beaches and the sunshine and the barbecues. If you've been watching the cricket at Hobart, you might realise that that's not quite Hobart. I mean, to be fair to Hobart, I would say it has the nicest summer in Australia. It's just that it actually has only the summer. The rest of the year is not so good, and it's not summer in Australia yet, as South Africa probably found out. It was freezing, and when it gets cold in Hobart, it really gets cold in Hobart. Obviously, they get a lot of rain as well. It's a very green state compared to the rest of Australia. And we could have almost had 2 washouts tonight at times. There was so much rain around. But if you really wanted to know how cold it was, Bangladesh's dugout couldn't have looked any colder if they tried. Shakib Al Hassan, Alan Donald, both wrapped up in puffer jackets. There were blankets involved, from what I could see. There were blankets in the crowd, so even the locals were feeling it. It was bad. And it should be said that Bangladesh still had fairly good support from the crowd as well. They, their fans, you could definitely hear them. I mean, perhaps they were just trying to stay as loud as they could to stay warm. But that is the last day of Hobart's tournament. Sorry, I should also say, of course, the Tiger Mask backpack thing, whatever this thing is. I mean, Charlie put this in. I'm not even sure what it is. He says it's a backpack. Is it a backpack? Center of screen. Anyway, answers in the comments. But today marked the last day of Hobart as a tournament venue, and hasn't been ideal. Certainly, the West Indies won't want to come back for a very long time. Oh, and talking about the West Indies on 99.94 have put out their podcast on what has happened. A lot of people within the West Indies cricket have been talking about how Phil Simmons should be sacked, and Michelle and Santoki have taken a look at the Phil Simmons facts for you, and let us lay them out here.
Oh, yes, because someone's got to be accountable. That's one argument. Is Phil to blame for the batters not being able to bat consistently? Some say yes, because he's the head coach. Monty Desai is the batting coach. They need to take responsibility for these players not being able to bat. So, yes, he should go. Has Phil presided over 2 back-to-back T20 World Cups where we flopped? Yes, so Phil should go. So all of those are arguments for the prosecution. Here's the arguments for the defense. These batters, who apparently Phil is to blame for, in the same way how... No, in fact, I won't use that analogy. Phil doesn't go out onto the pitch to bat for these guys, right? He doesn't go out to bat for them. When these batters continually show the same elementary mistakes, trying to lash the ball out for 6 on big grounds where the dimensions don't suit that style of play, and bowling into traps at Ireland and Scotland and Zimbabwe, falling into traps at Ireland, Scotland and Zimbabwe are set him. Where is the line between a coach saying, don't do that, and then the players continually doing that? Now, I hear what people are going to say probably in response. Well, it's the coach's job to make sure they don't do that. But where's the line where the players take some responsibility? And also, Santoki, where's the line where we say, and I've said it before, maybe they're not that good?
Michelle going all in there. The Phil Simmons thing is really interesting. I think you could make a fairly solid argument that, as genius as he was and ahead of the game when it came to T20 cricket, that his tactics are no longer as viable, and obviously the game itself has changed. But at the same time, I'm not sure they had anyone who could last more than 30 balls in that World Cup consistently. So, hard to blame the coach at that point unless you want him to go out and bat for them, as Michelle said. But West Indies on 99.94, really good episode. Go listen to that. And India on 99.94. Should we just chuck some Kohli stuff in? Let's play that.
Say for round 2.
Yeah, just a bit more on Kohli. We've been following his career for so long, and just when we think that, okay, he can't do anything more that will surprise us, he just keeps churning it out again and again and again. And against Pakistan, he has that phenomenal record, just bettered it even more after this match. 6 out of 6 times chasing. He's helped India win 6 out of 6 times against Pakistan when they're chasing, and 18 times when he's been unbeaten in a run chase. India have gone on to win a T20I match. So, chase master for a reason, and, adjectives fall short on.
Objectives do fall short as we cut Sarah off there. But go see the India on 99.94 podcast. Have been doing very well. That's the end of our scripted show for today. A little bit less scripted because obviously we're writing it right up until the last minute because of the rain and trying to work out what the hell was going on with that. In fact, I actually did a podcast with Virat, which you'll be able to listen to on my podcast feed tomorrow, where we slipped it in before the rain because we just thought it was so wet there. We thought there was absolutely no way they were going to play. So incredible they did. But let's get to some questions from everyone. I'm sure there's a few on the rain. Oh, and there's the first one. Vamasab says, why not keep at least one reserve day? So the ICC have told me fairly consistently over the last few years that reserve days don't really work for the main part of the tournament, and it's just because the entire schedule gets pushed back. It's not just a one-off game. If they had to have a reserve day for everything, the whole tournament would take a lot longer. I don't think it's a viable option. Have said before, there is a ground in Australia with a roof on it that holds T20 cricket, but even regardless of that, I don't think that they are viable options for the main part of the tournament, and they've decided that they're never going to do that. I don't think we would ever have round robin games with reserve days. Finals obviously a little bit different, but I think we're just going to have to get used to that. Thank you, C Square. It's not really a question. Time says 13 runs with 4 overs and 10 wickets left. BS at the game wasn't given to South Africa. No. I mean, you're right, they were going to win it, but that happens a lot in Duckworth-Lewis games. Like, at a certain point, they have to play the game. You could argue that there are other ways of doing it, but we can't suddenly, I mean, when you say it's BS, we can't suddenly change what the Duckworth-Lewis calculations are midway through the tournament. There are other options out on the table. We've seen other rain calculations used for T20 games because of things that you're saying there, but that's the system that we came in with. It's a bit like, complaining that England won boundaries, right? Like, at a certain point, those were the playing conditions beforehand. So it's not BS that this game happened. You could argue that it's BS. I don't know why I'm saying BS instead of bullshit, but you could argue that it's BS based on the fact that they've never done anything overall to make sure that these sorts of situations don't happen. But, having 5 overs minimum, or the game being finished seems like a fairly decent compromise. But there are always going to be cases where it looks a little bit stupider than it normally does, and certainly today was one of them. Let's have a look what else we've got here. Okay, another one. Well, it's a rainy day, isn't it? Sports Breakdown says, shouldn't the ICC consider to actually give a result after 2 overs for at least the team instead of 5 overs when it comes to DLS method? I think 5 overs is probably pushing it, right? But the reason that we do that is, especially for tournament play, to ensure that there is still a game that is played. I'm not sure 10% of a game is particularly a game being played. So, I mean, 2 overs is just so little, right? I'm not even sure how you work the power play out and all those sorts of things for a game that short. And that's probably the reason they haven't done it. If you want to argue, like I assume someone like Time has before, that the entire system needs to be changed. I mean, I don't necessarily disagree with that at all. But 2 overs, I would never go for 2 overs. What Time was talking about is the percentage of runs that they had made, I think, and how close they were to victory should also play a part. And I haven't done the mathematics on that, so I don't know the best way of doing it. But I think we know that DLS is a flawed system for T20 cricket, but certainly bringing it to 2 overs would just make it. I don't think it's worth having a World Cup game where one team only has to play for 2 overs for it to be valuable. I'd really rather the washout. Not if it was my team being, if I was South African, I'd still be annoyed, but I'd rather the washout than not a proper. I mean, there were parts today where I was watching that game just going, why are they even out on the field? This should certainly not be a game that is going ahead. We have to actually keep some semblance of it being proper top-level cricket. And there were certainly times where that wasn't the case in this game. Time says, Bangladesh never seem to have any power hitters. Yeah, there's a really good podcast I did with Muhammad Issam where I think it must have been during or after the last World Cup where we really went through all the different reasons and I went through the stats. So one of the most interesting things, which I might bring up again later in this tournament, was that I assumed that Bangladesh players were struggling because they played in the BPL and it's one of the slowest scoring leagues in the world, and so that it was just a tough league. And then when you spring out of it, that's where you played the majority of your T20 cricket. But then I had a look, and all the overseas players in the BPL actually scored at quite decent rates a lot of the time. It's just the Bangladeshis that don't. They do seem to produce a lot of very technically correct players. They don't have a lot of power hitters in the middle. Something that Muhammad Issam talked about. It's a very coach-led, technically correct style of cricket that Bangladeshis do play, and there's a lot of other reasons. Pitches are a problem. The fact that they haven't been good at T20 perhaps is a problem. If you're not good at it, maybe your players get pushed towards the parts that they are. But if you can find that podcast and you're interested in Bangladesh batting, it's really interesting. As I said, I didn't go into it today, but certainly something worth looking at going ahead. This is a random one, but I'll answer. Dogger says, is Murali the only wrist off spinner? No, Johan Botha. We've had a couple of other guys who've done similar kinds of actions in a slightly different way as well. I think Murali would be the first one that I'm aware of. I think he'd also be the first bowler whose the back of his arm was facing the batter when it was coming, the majority of the time. So obviously with wrist spinners, that can happen a little bit. So there was a few things that Murali certainly did that no one else did at that stage. Netherlands is a team full of imports, man. No respect to them. Thank you, Amitesh, for asking this. I always love it when people say that. Well, they're not a team full of imports, to start with. Vikramjit Singh, Baz the leader, Max O'Dowd, all people who came up through junior levels cricket in the Netherlands. They've got a couple of other players going through. Their former captain, who just retired before this World Cup, was another one as well. But the more important thing is to know that that's what South Africa started as. In fact, you could argue that's what Australia started as. West Indies as well. We've seen many teams. Ireland, many teams have done this throughout the history of cricket. Cricket is generally played by expats in a country before it takes hold. So when people say things like that, it's nonsense, right? Especially in this modern day and age where people have mixed heritage, where people live in different countries when they're growing up and all those sorts of things. But also, that is how cricket has always grown. Not in all countries, but the vast majority of countries. Those early South African teams are basically English teams. And we see it again and again through associate cricket. And then things start to change. I mean, we've already seen the Ireland team now. You look at the Ireland team earlier on in their history, and you would have said the exact same thing. You have to build a cricket culture. And that is what Netherlands are doing over there. And, with the younger players coming through their system, fair play to them. These are certainly really, really talented cricketers that they are now developing for the first time. And we hope that they continue to do that and that they move on. You've got to know your history if you're going to make a comment like that on this channel. And because too few people ever do, if we're being honest. Let's have a look at what else we have here. Jay says, Netherlands openers are bad. They should try others. Well, Max O'Dowd has made literally I think he's made somewhere around 3 times as much runs as any other Dutch players over the last 2 World Cups. They're trying Vikramjit as an opener, the young player. He's probably the most talented young player coming in. Their strength has obviously been the middle order, has been for a very long time. They've tried quite a few players. If you would have watched their summer of recent times, they're going through a lot of other players. There's not a huge depth of talent in Dutch batting at the moment, but with Vikramjit and Baz the leader, they're hoping that those players will obviously come big. They've moved them up the order, partly because it fits their skill set, but also because they did have, well, Roloff is not playing at the moment, but Edwards and Cooper, Ackerman, Tenduscarter at the last World Cup. Their strength is a sort of those older players in the middle. But O'Dowd has been the one that's been scoring all their runs and played a very good innings. The last game the Dutch played? Vikranjit, I said if you go back, I thought he played some really good innings against some very good teams in Netherlands last summer, but I also thought this was too soon for him as a player. He's quite limited at the moment. He's still working out what his game is. It's very possible in this tournament he will still have a very big performance at one stage. He's a beautiful striker of the ball, but a long way away from being consistent at that level. Let's see what else we have. Let's have a look at Optus Stadium in Perth. Sports Breakdown says, since the Optus Stadium in Perth is newly rolled and the curators have made a new pitch, do you think Sri Lanka has any chance of beating Australia? Look, Australia is so poor against spin of recent times that if they can get past David Warner, there's a very good chance that they can put some pressure on. David Warner and Maxwell, obviously, very good. But, Australia's recent history in T20 cricket with spin is not particularly good. So that keeps Sri Lanka in the game. If it is a wicket for pace bowlers, though, I mean, Sri Lanka almost don't have anyone fit. I need the list. Someone sent me the list the other day and I've lost it. But missing a lot of, good quality pace bowling at the moment. And it's tough for them to be, if it becomes that sort of shootout. Like if they played at Melbourne, for instance, I think that would be more of a problem. It'd be interesting to see what happens at Perth. But they're not going to win based on their seam bowlers at the moment, unless someone has a day out, of course. At the moment, you would say that what they've been able to do is really control teams through the middle with those two spinners. Incredible. It's an incredible combination. And they haven't batted particularly well yet in this tournament. I'm not even sure that their seamers have always bowled particularly well either. But those spinners have kept them in games when they shouldn't be there, and they've won them games at other times. So because of that, and Australia's particular weakness against it of recent times, Sri Lanka still has a decent chance of that. Also, Australia just came off a game where everyone played poorly. Obviously, there'll be some regression where you wouldn't expect that again, but they're not exactly flying, are they? It's a good time to play them. So it'll be interesting to see what is going on there. And let's see what else we got. Any more questions here? Akeem says, Netherlands chase horribly like always. Weirdly enough, they didn't even start the chase, though. You would say that the chase didn't start till they were 6 wickets down. So, I mean, they lost 2 wickets and then they had 2 runouts before they even got to the chase. But they've had some very weird batting performances so far this World Cup. One thing I would say is with all that strength in the middle order, the last 2 World Cups, Ackerman making runs today was really important because it's so rare that any of those high-profile middle order players that they have done anything. I'm not sure today I would say, they chased horribly like always. I mean, they don't usually lose 2 wickets on the first 2 balls and then run a guy out without facing a ball after someone else has just been run out, right? The normal chases have been horrible in a completely different way. This was not a fluke, but this was a different kind of a situation. I think what you're talking about is the other games where they seem to put themselves behind the 8 ball quite a bit and really, and make games a lot harder than they should be. Let's see what else we have. Oren says, really enjoyed the Mitch Johnson and Australia episode. Do you think this tournament has been marketed properly due to lack of crowds in some games? I mean, to be honest, Oren, it's October in Australia. And Australia's only played 1 game. If anyone was expecting big crowds for this tournament, that was just never going to happen. I think Geelong probably and Hobart were picked partly because they thought they would get, because they don't play a lot of international cricket in either, they thought they would get some good crowd. We've had some good travelling crowds, haven't we? Bangladesh, Sri Lanka. I don't know if it counts for Sri Lanka because most of the players just came down from Melbourne. Most of the commentators, supporters came down from Melbourne. Netherlands have had some decent crowds. Zimbabwe was quite surprising, the amount of Zimbabwean fans I've seen down in Hobart as well. So from that perspective, I think they've done okay, but they're never going to get 20,000 or 10,000 people to these sorts of games. The majority of the games that we've seen so far were the first week of the tournament, when, to be fair, the ICC weren't really promoting it because it wasn't the real tournament. We've only just started the main part of the tournament. Obviously, India-Pakistan was never going to be a problem. There'll be a couple of other good games. Sri Lanka usually get good support in most parts of Australia as well. But it's October. Australia don't get particularly good crowds when they play internationals in October and November, because Australian cricket fans go to the cricket in January and December and a little bit of February. That's the time that you go to cricket in Australia. It's a very weird mini summer that Australian cricket has. Well, it's not a mini summer, it's an actual summer, 3 months. But you know what I mean? It's not like some of the other cricket cultures where, you know, you go to the cricket. It's, you know, that's why Boxing Day and Australia Day and New Year's and all those become events, because they're kind of like the height of that summer. Yeah, I'm not surprised. As far as marketing, it's really hard to tell how well they've marketed it. I'm back in London at the moment. I'm not out there, but I wouldn't have thought they would have marketed the first part of the tournament very much, because, you know, it's not really what they wanted to market. They wanted to market this part of the tournament. Let's see what else we've got. So we've seen every team play so far. I mean, we've barely seen South Africa play, but yeah, I suppose that's fair. Which one is easier? The easier group, I suppose it depends on what you mean by easier. The easier group should still be India, South Africa, and Pakistan. But that's such a confusing, messy group now, because Pakistan has lost the game and South Africa have lost a point. And it's the perfect way to start the tournament to have New Zealand beat Australia, because that actually explodes that part of, instead of Australia and England just getting on top and New Zealand falling away, now Australia is going to have to do quite well. If Australia beat England, that opens it up again. Overall, and I would have thought that that is still the harder group, all things considered. But, you know, I mean, the groups are what they are, I think, at a certain point, aren't they? Let's see what else we have here. Ritik says, should World Cups be played in a round-robin format like leagues, so that one single game in the group stage doesn't have impact of knockout? Well, it depends on what you're looking for here. I mean, realistically, 15 games in a T20 league isn't enough to tell you who the best team is. There's been, they play 82 games in basketball, and then they play the best of 7 in the final series. And there's plenty of maths to suggest even then the best teams don't win. I don't know about if the same is of baseball as well. That's not what a World Cup is really about, though, is it? It really is about that pressure, the fact that you have to win each game, that it's a carnival of your sport in this, you know, in cricket and everything else. You would never, ever design a tournament like this World Cup if you wanted the best team to win. That's not what it's designed for. It's designed to be over as quickly as possible, to get as many games out there and have India play Pakistan at least once. That is what the World Cup is designed for. Just see if there's anything else. Sorry, I'm just seeing if there's any questions. There's a little comment. Oh, sorry, I'll just get to the last couple. Jay, would you say the ICC Super League is the best thing that happened to associate and weaker test playing nations? Well, it was, and, you know, obviously they cancelled it. I watched a lot of Ireland and Netherlands play cricket this year, and every time there was, especially in the Netherlands, where they never really had a summer like that before, you know, every time someone was on the air, they were just saying that this is absolutely incredible for Dutch cricket. They got crowds into their games. They had regular cricket. They could really work on this. You know, I think it's a little bit too easy to say that Ireland and the Netherlands had a great year of cricket at home and Namibia and Scotland didn't, and Namibia and Scotland went out in the first round. But I also think that, you know, playing regular cricket against really quality opponents is obviously the way forward. It's a great idea. So it's a real shame that we're not going to see any more of that going ahead. Let's have a look. Sports Breakdown says, do you see Sikandar Raza getting picked by an IPL team? I think we've had this question before, actually. I shouldn't have picked this one. Sorry, everyone. What I would say is that I think one reason he wasn't picked before is because as good as he's been, he's never really combined batting and the bowling to the level that he currently has. And also he was more of a traditional off spinner before. And I think that when scouts and managers and coaches and people from India looked at that, they were like, well, why do we need to pick an off spinner who can bat a bit? Well, that's something we could probably find locally. He's now not that. He's now a lot more than that. There was the photo today up. What was he got? He's got a back of the hand wrong and a carom ball, a knuckle ball, and an off spinner. I forgot the obvious one there, everyone. Sorry. I think that makes him a much more interesting prospect. There was, I think, Bavuma, pardon me, tried to hit him today, first ball, and I think it was the knuckle ball. And it just didn't come on the way that Bavuma thought it was going to, even within the, you would expect it to skid. The knuckleball just sort of hovered a little bit more in the air. So I do think that he's a chance. But at the very least, I think he should be getting more chances in higher leagues. I kind of thought that 3 or 4 years ago, if I'm being honest. But I think he's much better now. I think he's much more attractive now, which is the other thing that needs to be known. Food, I'm not going to read the rest of that, but Food says, can any big team get eliminated from the Super 12? Wait, do you mean the semi-finals? I mean, the Super 12's kind of with us at the moment. Australia definitely could miss out on it. Pakistan and South Africa, chances of missing the semi-finals as well. That's as it currently lies. We're really early on in that part of the tournament. And last question from HT. So we've just done a whole podcast with this on with Virat, but what's your take on pitches at different venues in Australia? So the first thing to note is that you wouldn't usually play a T20 in Melbourne in October. So the grounds staff wouldn't be able to do that. And Australia, in different parts of Australia, is obviously different. Most places won't have any problems, but in Melbourne and Tasmania, the early season pitches are quite different to what you get in the middle of summer. And in this particular case, it's rained like hell in Melbourne. So that is not the kind of pitch you would normally get. Hobart, again, is not, you wouldn't want to play T20 crickets in Hobart. I'm not even sure you want to play club cricket in Hobart that time of the year on turf wickets. So I certainly think that they're quite different. I think the one thing that we've noticed so far is that the bowlers are a little bit in it more than we thought they would be, and that the surfaces have acted a little bit more helpful towards bowlers. Now there are many different factors in that. It's really early on in the tournament, and they're playing the games in October in the south of Australia, where it is more moist and more cold, right? As we start to move to Adelaide and Perth and Brisbane and Sydney, will things change? Will the pitches get a little bit more flat, where those places have a little bit more heat in them, and we might see slightly more normal cricket? The other thing that I think is quite interesting is that so far it's helped the more specialist batting players. Shan Masood, Kusal Mendes, Virat Kohli, Devon Conway, Max O'Dowd, these sorts of, more batters rather than hitter batters. The hitter batters haven't done very well. Again, will that change throughout the rest of the tournament? I don't know. The only thing I would add is, because some of the Australian grounds are just so much bigger, playing T20 in Australia is slightly different than in other places around the world, in that hitting a 4 or 6 is harder. And so perhaps what we're seeing is why Australia produced so many good anchors over the years, is that that you have to use the ground, and that's a little bit different for some of the other teams who are used to just hitting 4s and 6s and getting away with it. Most important thing is that this World Cup is going to be won by the team who hits the most 3s. I really hope that's true. Anyway, thank you to everyone for coming on. Again, we'll be back tomorrow and around 2 p.m. What's the game tomorrow? Oh, no, it's later tomorrow. Oops, sorry, everyone. It's the late game tomorrow, isn't it? So a little bit later tomorrow, but we'll try and get it up within an hour of the game. There's just the one game on tomorrow, so if you do have any burning questions, feel free to stick around. I might have to fill more time unless the game is absolutely brilliant in Perth. But thank you to everyone. Rate, review, subscribe. Tell everyone we're going to be here every day of the World Cup, covering all the teams as we do. And shall we have a little bit of Virat and Mitch talking on their new podcast? I think we shall play a little bit of Virat and Mitch on their new podcast.
We blush a little bit. No, but I think, like you say, I think where our connections come from, we've spent a bit of time in the comms box around the presses and all that, and we've got along really well. And I think that connection will show throughout this podcast. And the other thing is we look pretty similar as well. You keep banging on about how much you look like me. Maybe if I grew my hair a little bit longer, I think, the more I look, I'm trying to look at both the screens at the moment. See your face and my face. But we're very, very similar. But no, look, very much like yourself, mate. Very genuine, a hardworking journalist. And you write books. You do plenty of good stuff. So I think this little partnership we have here is it's destiny, as some would say.
Oh, you're making me blush now. Yeah, thank you for that. Like, I thought I was the one. It was my job to talk you up.
So there you go. Go and watch the boys. Their first episode without me is up now, and you can certainly follow that podcast wherever you get podcasts and everything else. But subscribe here, press the bell, do everything else, and we'll see you same place. I was going to say same time every day, but it's not, is it? Because of this World Cup. Same rough time every day for this World Cup. Thanks for joining us.